very, very special in this last quarter with the breeze. Is this Bernie Shee's last address to them of the season?
Just got to give it another 30 minutes. Of just the biggest effort you've ever had. Right? Nothing else. Nothing else. It doesn't matter. At the moment, you're 7 goals behind. If they happen to get the first goal, it's 8. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You just got to be like good Springvale people have been for 3 years. It didn't matter what the score was, that we went hammer and tongs, and that's all anybody can ask of you. That you go hammer and tongs the whole time. Whether it's the oldest bloke, Koopy, to the youngest bloke. Right.
Hammer and tongs it is for the last quarter for Springvale. And maybe, not just the last quarter of this season, maybe the last quarter in VFA football for them. Maybe next Sunday's grand final is going to be the last VFA grand final. Tony Hannabury has assured us the new competition will be called the VFA. Other people are just as confident it won't be. Phil, I know you're itching to ask Tony some questions at half-time. Anyone who listened to 3AW during the week might have heard some of those, but I know you're certainly probably the most outspoken of anybody against what's going to happen.
Yes, I am, Peter, and I think if the viewers today were here and had a copy of the VFA recorder, or Victorian footballer, they'd notice that 2 pages here are allocated to Ken Gannon to speak about the VFA. There is not one criticism in that document from anyone who's prepared to be named from the VFA. There is not a counter-position in this statement. What the person who's written the article's done is grabbed a number of presidents who remain anonymous. Now, that is a very serious problem, I think, for the recorder to be handed over. Now, we want to get down to some questions. Tony says the name next year, but what about after that? I've seen a memo from the VFA that says the name is up for grabs. Now, if the administrators have given up the name, they ought to say straight, and Tony Hannabury ought to declare to the people of Victoria that we've lost the name. If we haven't lost the name, and it's a real possibility, then you can speak that way. What are the management rights and what sort of autonomy does the VFA have? And finally, Sam, I know you want to say something. Under Ken Gannon's report, the clubs are aligned to zones. Coburg has a zone, but is being told that it's in a two-way corner or two-way struggle with Port Melbourne. But no one at the VFA is talking about Williamstown.
This is the northwest zone.
You'll see on the screen the northwest, which Coburg is the only team in that zone. In the western you have Williamstown, and in the central you have Port Melbourne. Yet no one at VFA level is saying that Port Melbourne and Williamstown ought to merge. What they're saying is that maybe Port Melbourne...
They do. They want them to merge.
Well,
that's been put to them.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Well, at the same time, we read this week that maybe there'll be a new board member who happens to be Mr. Oborne, who's a former Williamstown president. Now, at a delicate time in proceedings, you have to be very careful about making statements like who is going onto a board at a critical time. So, as far as I'm concerned, there are a lot of questions that have not been answered, and we need to get the facts on the table. Look, Ken Gannon is not in a position where he has to say nothing. He is in a position where he is supposedly organising the future of Victorian football. People with an interest in Victorian football have a right to ask specific questions about the future of their club, and they're not being answered.
The thing I worry about, Sam drew an analogy with Yugoslavia. The breakup of Yugoslavia sent state against state, and I'm worried that whether you think
exactly what's
the VFA has to change or not, we don't want to see clubs tearing at each other
for these, by the way.
These
Tony listening to us?
No.
He's not answering the question.
No,
I've been waiting for a response. I was going to ask Tony, in fact, how effective has the board been at the negotiating table? Because if you cast your memory back whilst it's in its infancy, when the VSFL made it abundantly clear that it was not going to financially bail out any of the tribal clubs in Melbourne, or the VFA, pardon me, clubs, you'll notice that there were a lot of clandestine meetings by a couple of presidents, which intimated to me that the board was not effective at any of the negotiating table conducted by Oakley or Gannon in the first instance. And I have a sneaking
Prahran,
suspicion.
for example, their deal was done last Tuesday,
exactly,
as far as I understand, for the
and a viable notion, I think a viable notion was floated also that the VFA could have really grabbed at the time, and that's the area of development and promotion. When the VFL clubs or the AFL clubs effectively relinquished the right to govern or administer football in Victoria and handed it over to the Commission, they effectively gave away promotion and development. That could have been a charter that the VFA could have effectively picked up, because the infrastructure of 117 years is very much in place, albeit, as we both know, it is very fragile. An injection of revenue or expertise or management could well work.
And let's tell...
But I just don't feel at the moment it has been thoroughly thought through. We're not averse to change. We realise in our current format we can't survive. It is prone to modification.
Yes, and Sam, let's tell the people too of Victoria who are listening in that the VFA has done it hard in the last 10 years. If the AFL had been seriously interested in promoting the VFA, we could have been a much stronger body. We were strong when we had our own Sunday, right? That's gone. We all accept that. But we haven't had one finger lifted by the AFL in the interest of football. That's what I'm talking about, football.
But what's the motive behind... Sorry, the motive behind restructure in Victoria is what? Is to ensure that our youth has got the easiest passage to aspire to the pinnacle, and that is playing the best football.
Well, a very emotive issue, as you can well judge. Springvale will have to play with emotion in this last quarter of the preliminary final. Ross Booth.
I listened to John Murphy, who was really unemotional, trying to get his the side to keep playing the percentage of the Mustangs in this final quarter. Springvale won't give up, he said, and this club, Box Hill, is on the verge of the greatest thing ever, playing in a VFA Grand Final.